Okay, and good evening, everyone. My name is Tony Mancuso, and I serve as the Communications and Outreach Senior Specialist for the Summer Help Professions Education Program. And this evening, I'm joined by Julie Gilbert from AAMC's first program, and she'll be going over a lot of important financial information. Julie, feel free to take it away.
All right, thank you. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining me this evening. I really hope to provide a lot of resources and information that will help you. I encourage you to ask questions as we go along. Tony will be monitoring the Q&A box, and we'll take all of those questions at the end. So I would tell you, if you have a question, write it down, but wait to enter it into the Q&A box, because it's a very good possibility that I will answer your question before you even ask it. So I am going to dive right in and talk with you first about what you need to know about and where you can go for information. And one of those places is going to the website, to the AAMC's student website, where we house the first program. The first program is actually a free program for students. It is for anyone that wants information about financial aid, loan repayment, and even general money management. So I'm going to talk with you first about all of the resources that you can find through our program right on the website. So if you go to the first homepage, what you're going to see is we have our resources broken down into different categories. Now, I do have to tell you, you might see some changes to the website in the next few months, but right now, this is how it is laid out. And first of all, what you'll want to click on is the Learn More section. We have the resources for pre-med students under the section entitled Thinking About How You Will Pay for Medical School. So that's where you're going to find a lot of information for this point in your career. One of the most comprehensive resources that you're going to find on the first web page or the website is this Education Debt Manager. This publication doesn't only talk about financial aid, but it talks about loan repayment, budgeting, credit, different types of loan forgiveness programs, and just the general information that you need, even about credit and identity theft protection. So there's a ton of information right within this brochure publication, I should say, and I would encourage you to bookmark this. We update it whenever federal regulations change or whenever information does change regarding all these different types of financial topics. Within the first program, we have these articles that we call fact sheets, and they're going to be about topics that are sometimes confusing, sometimes overwhelming. And I'll be quite honest with you, when it comes to financial aid, lots of times it's just a matter of the terminology that gets people confused, because just like a lot of different programs that talk about acronyms and have their own way of working through information, financial aid is that way as well. So for instance, the financial aid application process involves completing the FAFSA form. Now, if you guys are currently in undergraduate school, you will know that if you're applying for financial aid, that the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, is the very first part of applying for aid. So not only is that true for undergraduate study, it's going to be true for those that are applying to go to medical school and want to obtain federal financial aid. So we have a fact sheet or an article about the application process of applying for aid to attend medical school. This is just one example of a fact sheet that we have available, but I would encourage you to take a look at them. We have over 70 fact sheets that are available over a lot of different topics. So there's a ton of information out there for you. The other thing that I think is important to know is that sometimes, and if you're like me, going to a website, sometimes just getting your sea legs in order to find what you're looking for is sometimes the most difficult part. And so what we've tried to do with the first program is provide a search tool specifically for our materials. So if you're familiar with going onto the AAMC Student Hub, you know that we have pathways, like if you're a pre-med student and and to think about preparing to go to medical school and different things that you're going to think about as you go. But within the first program, we also have a search tool to find information specific to financial aid and loan repayment and general money management. So from our first web pages, you will actually see our own search tool. You can search by a keyword, you can search by audience, such as pre-med or residents. You can search by category, like loan repayment or budgeting or credit. And what this does is when you enter a search, it will pull up specific information that you're looking for. So for example, if I do a keyword search on scholarships, or if I do a search by audience or by category, you're going to see all of the information based upon that search. So here I did a search for scholarships. So once I type in that keyword search, everything that comes up will have the word scholarship in it. It's either going to be in the name or in the body, but it all these resources will pertain to scholarship in some shape or form. So it's just a really great way to narrow down what you're looking for. To be quite honest, I often use the keyword search because I know of what I'm looking for, and it's an easy way to pop up the resources that have to do with that specific topic. The other thing that I wanted to draw your attention to are some other articles. And if you're familiar with the Pre-Med Navigator, which is a newsletter that comes out once a month, some of these things you're going to see. One of the articles that was written for the Pre-Med Navigator is this top 10 questions pre-meds should ask their financial aid officers. What we recommend, and what we actually did, was talk to financial aid officers to find out what students should be asking when they're visiting a school or contemplating applying to a school. And because many times, I'll be quite honest with you, many times students don't ask the hard financial aid questions until after they've been accepted to a medical school. In my opinion, you probably want to know a little bit more before you get to that point. In my opinion, proper planning will prevent you pausing your process in going forward. So if you can plan a little bit, think about the things to ask, think about the things to look for on different schools' websites. This is one great article that will help you narrow down some of those questions. We also have the financial wellness program, and this is a financial literacy program. So this is basically for any consumer. You don't have to be a pre-med student. You don't have to be a medical student or a resident. You could be anyone. You could be a parent. You could be a friend of yours. Anybody has access to this resource. And what it is it provides information about general money management. So like budgeting and credit, taxes, insurance, all those things that all consumers need to know at different points in their life. And so depending upon where you are and what your level of understanding of different financial concepts is, will determine how you might want to use this program. But you should know it's available to you now and in the future. So I'm going to dive in to talk a little bit about how much will it cost to apply to go to medical school. And I want to ask you, and I'm going to ask you actually to put this in the Q&A box. So if you could, and Tony, I'm going to apologize because you can just ignore all these that come in. But I want to know from you folks that are online, how much do you think you will actually pay to apply to go to medical school? If you could just type something into the Q&A box, type it in as a question, and then that way I will start to see how much some of you are thinking it's going to cost. All right, some are saying 6,000, 10 to 15, 300 per app, 2,000, at least 2,000, 500, 5,000. All right, good. We are kind of all over the board there. So I'm glad to see that, because now I can dive in and show you exactly what kind of costs you might actually incur on just applying to go to medical school. So the next thing I wanted to show you was a sampling of what some of these expenses might be. So you guys are probably familiar with the Mcat. I'm sure this is not an unfamiliar term for you, but the Mcat, of course, is the exam, right? But before you even get to take the exam and apply to take the exam, some people will encounter preparation expenses, such as if they decide to take an Mcat prep course or if they purchase Mcat prep materials. Then there's, of course, the Mcat registration costs. Some students will choose to participate or purchase access to the medical school admission requirements, which, that can vary depending upon if you want a 1 or 2 year subscription. Some people don't want to use that at all, but it is an available resource. Then, of course, there's the AMCAS, which is the actual application service. And depending upon how many schools you apply to, there's going to be a charge for that. Some schools will have a secondary application cost as well, and that can range. Some schools have a CASPER test, which is like a situational judgment test, and you have to pay for those. Then, of course, pre-COVID, there was always the travel and transportation, which would also include lodging and food and sometimes clothing to go on school interviews. Now, of course, this is probably one positive thing regarding COVID is that that's cut down on some of these expenses because things have been moving to the virtual type of interview. There could be deposits required by the schools. And if you go and had a second look type of visit, again, then you would have more travel and transportation and lodging expenses. But if you totaled up all of those fees and expenses, and I used the column on the right to say, okay, what if I did this or what if I did that? So example for Mcat prep, if I did the Mcat prep bundle through the AAMC, that's $294. If I applied for my registration for Mcat, that's $320. If I took advantage of the MSAR for 2 years, that's $36. So if you continue down this list of possible expenses, you could be at maybe $3,800. Of course, that could be less now because of the less expense that you have with interviewing, but there could be other things that might have increased for you. So, this is a possible expense. And I go over these because I think it's important for people to be aware of these expenses. And the bottom line, the way I see it, is that these are all expenses that you really need to start preparing for and planning for, because as you can see, yes, some of these are fees that you're going to pay to take the Mcat exam. Others you could possibly take for preparation. Some of them are going to be up to the school, and some of them are strictly going to be up to the student, meaning like if I'm interviewing at a school that's in my hometown, there's going to be less expense for interviewing than there might be if I was going to go check out a school, on the other side of the US. So these expenses can definitely vary, but the bottom line is being prepared for them and thinking about those expenses now, because there is no actual financial aid to apply to get these fees covered. So this is something that you have to plan for and save for in many cases. The other resources that I wanted to let you know about, this is a resource that was actually put out through the Office of Health Professions Advising at Princeton University, and they've given us permission to let others know about this. Not only does this also give you a sampling of possible expenses, but they also provide more information and things to consider about the application expenses that you may incur. So I would encourage you to take a look at this as well. I think it's a very well put together resource for students. Now, I do want to talk with you a little bit about the fee assistance program, because this is a program that can possibly help students with financial assistance to help cover some of the costs associated with applying to medical school. This is a program through the AAMC, and I want to go over some of the eligibility requirements for you and tell you a little bit about how it works. I know some of you are probably already familiar with this since you are SHPEP ambassadors. Many of you are, so you'll probably be familiar with this, but I think a refresher is probably always a good thing to have in mind. So, the eligibility requirements for the fee assistance program are shown here on the screen. I'll let you go ahead and read over those, and many of you are probably aware of these requirements already. The one thing that is new due to COVID is the expanded income eligibility requirements and hardship procedures. So just so that you know that the approval for the fee assistance program has been moved from 300% to 400% or less of the national poverty guideline for 2019. So this is beneficial for students because it actually has allowed a number of students to receive the fee assistance program benefits that may not have been eligible in the past based upon those income requirements. It can take up to 5 business days for your application to be processed. So that's another important thing to know about the fee assistance program. Again, the fee assistance program is really a program to help with some of these application costs, and we'll go over those in detail in just a minute. And the other really important thing that I think is important to point out, because this always seems to give people a little bit of pause, and that is the fact that parental information is always required for the fee assistance program. And I point that out because, you know, I often have students that will say, well, I'm independent, you know, by federal regulations. I don't need my parents to apply for financial aid. And that may be true, but the fee assistance program is different. It is not a federal program. It is a program through the AAMC. And one of those requirements is for parents' information to be used in determining whether or not a student is going to be eligible for the fee assistance program benefits. What does the fee assistance program cover? Well, there's reduced Mcat registration and rescheduling fees. There's free Mcat prep materials, complimentary access to medical school admissions requirement, which is one of the things that I said before. Some students may choose to purchase and some may choose not to. There's a waiver for all AMCAS fees up to 20 medical schools, and an eligibility for scholarship towards if you should need an updated psychoeducational or medical reevaluation in order to take the MCAT and for MCAT accommodations. The important thing to understand is that with the fee assistance program, benefits are not retroactive. So what that means is you really truly need to kind of think in your mind and lay out a plan of when you are planning on taking the MCAT or when you were thinking about purchasing MSAR. Take a step back and think, I need to do the fee assistance application first, because if I get approved for fee assistance program, I need to be approved before I purchase the MSAR or before I register for MCAT, because those benefits are not going to be retroactive. There is the application process for the fee assistance program, and as you can see here, it opens in February, closes in December. Some of the information will transfer from your applicant, your AAMC applicant profile. There are automatic and manual reviews of information. You can upload the required applications online. And I know I said 5 days is normally the 5 business days you may receive your information regarding your eligibility, but it could also take a little bit longer depending upon how accurate you have been and how thorough your information was when you filled in your application. If you do need assistance with your application for the fee assistance program, you can reach out to the AAMC. You can call, you can email, you can even tweet. And if you do have any extenuating circumstances, let's say your application was denied or there's something specific to you that it's not, you know, something that would be applicable to everybody, but you have a unique situation, I would encourage you to reach out to the fee assistance program staff, either by phone or by email, so that they can help you understand what might be needed, or if any other types of documentation should be taken in place of maybe some type of tax document or that sort of thing. So please just be aware of the program and make sure that you reach out if you do have any questions. All right, so how much will medical school cost? I'm going to ask you to do the Q&A again too. So see, we're going to keep Tony busy by clearing out the Q&A box. I'd like you to tell me, what do you think it will cost to attend for 4 years of medical school? Put that in the Q&A box for me. Oh, you guys are fast. All right, I see 150, 400, 2 to 250, 200, $500,000, 400. Oh, a lot. I like that. Thank you, Hannah. About 450. Rachel says 200,000. All right. All right. So I'm seeing a lot of between 2 and 500,000. I see 100,000. Thank you, E. Ramos. I also see some 6-digit numbers there. I like that. And I'm going to say you could all be right, because a lot of it is going to be dependent upon a number of factors. So we're going to talk about this now. We're going to talk about what it actually looks like to attend medical school and where some of these costs come from. So we put out what's called the debt fact card. That's what we call this card that you see here on the right. It comes out every year in October, and it's updated with information that we obtain from schools, as well as information that we obtain from a questionnaire that we ask of students who are graduating regarding how much money did they actually borrow to attend medical school. And what we found, and this is for the class of 2020, we found that the median amount of debt for all students is $200,000. And if that may or may not surprise you, but that hasn't changed since 2019. So it's pretty much stayed the same. Now, that's the median amount of debt that it costs for students to fund medical school. Of course, there are going to be some people that borrow $500,000. There are also going to be some people that borrow $100,000. There may even be some that are able to go to school and not have to take out student loans. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how that might be a possibility for some people. But know that this information is available to you. I would encourage you to take a look at it. And the reason I say that is because I think it's good to lay a foundation of expectations and to realize what the current scene is, so that you're not shocked when it comes time to actually apply for loans or realize that you need to take out a loan. Because in all actuality, we know that 73% of medical students do borrow money to attend medical school. And it's going to be okay. I really want you to know that. I truly believe that to my core. I've been in financial aid for over 25 years. And what I can tell you is that you are going to be able to repay your student loans, regardless of if you borrow $500,000 or if you borrow $100,000. And I'm going to show you an example of that in a little bit too. Now, you need to know what makes up all of these costs and what are students borrowing for. And I know a lot of you that are undergraduate students, you already say, well, that's tuition and fees. And that's true, and there's a difference between public and private. Public is generally going to be a lower expense than what a private school is, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be borrowing more money to attend a private school. And I'll explain that in just one second. All of these things, your tuition and fees, go into the cost of attendance. And the cost of attendance actually incorporates more than just tuition and fees. It includes living expenses. It includes room and board, transportation, miscellaneous expenses, insurance and fees that are required by the school. And then if you multiply that cost of attendance for each year by 4, you come up with the 4-year total cost of attendance. So as you can see, public, just about $259,000, private, $346,000. Now that doesn't mean that you're going to need to take out a loan to cover the full cost of attendance. Many times it's a matter of the choices that you make. Granted, you can't do anything about tuition and fees. They are set by the school, and you're going to have to pay those to attend that school. But where you are going to have a little bit of leeway is when it comes to some of the expenses that you can control, like your room and board. Many students will choose to live off campus. Whether or not you choose to live by yourself or you choose to have a roommate can have a very big impact on what you need to borrow to attend medical school. Some people have chosen to live directly across the street from where the medical school campus is. And for doing that, they will pay a heavier price in rent than what somebody might pay if they are willing to take a bus or a train and have to be on that bus or train for 15, 20 minutes. That can have a big impact on what you need to borrow. And it all comes down to what you're willing to do and not do, which will, of course, affect how much you could potentially need to borrow to attend medical school as well, just like with anything else. But I think the bottom line is to know that you can borrow student loans up to the cost of attendance. So as long as you qualify for the loan programs, you are going to be able to cover your costs to attend school, including tuition and fees, room and board, transportation, all of those other expenses that are included in cost of attendance. So let's get down to how do you apply for financial aid? Well, those of you that are already taking out loans for undergraduate study will probably hear some of the same things that you already know. When you apply for financial aid for medical school, you are going to apply through the FAFSA form to apply for federal loans or any type of federal aid. The FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And the big difference here is that as a graduate or professional student, you are automatically considered an independent student. Okay, so as an undergraduate student, you would need your parental information to apply for financial aid. And there are limits on how much you can apply as a dependent student. But when you become a graduate and a professional student, you are eligible to borrow more money in your name. You don't need to submit your parental information in most cases in order to qualify for the federal aid. However, there are some medical schools that will require parental information, tax information, to determine your eligibility for aid. But it's not federal aid that they're determining eligibility for. They're determining eligibility for institutional programs, such as institutional loans or grants. So just know that even though you're an independent student, when you're a medical student, you could still be asked for your parental information by the school's financial aid office. As is with applying for aid as an undergraduate student, there are certain steps that you're going to want to take to apply for aid. The very first thing that I tell students, no matter where they are in their educational career, is that you need to get familiar with going to the school's financial aid web pages. So many times the information that you need to know is right before you, but you may not be aware of where to go or what to look for. So I would encourage you to start perusing the financial aid web pages of schools that you might be interested in. Many times you're going to find information such as grants that they might have to offer, maybe scholarship programs that they offer to students that attend that school. You're going to find out what the school's deadlines are, which are very important. Many times certain schools will have different deadlines and procedures that they follow, and they let their students know that right on their web pages. Again, you'll need to fill out that FAFSA form, and you'll do that at studentaid.gov. Once you submit that information that's on your FAFSA form will be sent to all of the schools that you indicate, which you can add up to 10 schools on your financial aid application on the FAFSA. If you want to apply, if you want more schools than those 10 to receive your information, you can always go back and add more schools. Once that information is sent to the school, then the schools will determine your aid eligibility and send you an aid offer. You're going to need to submit any necessary applications that the school requires of you, because some schools may have a secondary financial aid application. And so I would encourage you to be aware of whether or not that exists for each school that you're looking at possibly attending. And I always tell students, I think it's important to continually search for scholarships. And as you saw, we have that search tool on the first website where you could actually search for information regarding scholarships right on the first webpage. There are also a number of search databases for scholarships. However, one of the things that I want to caution you about, especially in today's day and age of identity theft and scams that are out there, and there's even a lot more scams going on right now because of COVID, just beware. Don't pay money to receive free money. If it sounds too good to be true, go with your gut, because many times if it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. If you're questioning anything, reach out to the financial aid staff to say, is this legitimate? Does this sound like it's something I should pursue? Because I don't want to see anybody fall victim to a scam, and they are out there. So be careful of that. Make sure you're going to legitimate websites and applying for legitimate types of scholarships. If you qualify, they're awesome, because in my opinion, even if you can get $500 or $1,000, that's $500 or $1,000 less than what you would need to borrow perhaps to attend school. So just keep that in mind and be on the lookout for those types of options. So what kind of aid is actually available as a medical student? Well, a lot of this is going to be the same as it is for an undergraduate student. There could be grants and scholarships available, and if they are available, they're going to be usually based upon either need or merit. And then there are other types of loans that are available. And with the FAFSA form, you're applying for a federal loan, whereas the school could have their own application to apply for institutional type loans. And then there are private loans. And we're going to talk a little bit about each of these different types of loans so that you understand how they work and how they differ. Before we jump into that, I want you all to know, because this is actually something that could be impacting you right now as an undergraduate student. The CARES Act, if you haven't heard of that, it's basically a COVID relief measures for student borrowers. And these are positive benefits that are currently in place for student borrowers. And basically what the CARES Act is, it started with relief measures that started back in March 13th of 2020. They initially went out a few months. The most recent change came about at the end of January, which has now extended these relief measures through September 30th. And what it's actually doing is, if students were in repayment, it has suspended payments being due. And for those that have unsubsidized loans, those are loans in which the government is not paying the interest on the loan. That means the borrower is responsible for that interest. But because of the CARES Act, that's actually been suspending interest accrual on student loans. So that's a very good thing. Interest rates right now are set at 0% for federal student loans because of the CARES Act relief measures. What's important to know about these relief measures is that they do not apply to private loans. So if anybody has a private loan and is required to make a payment, that is still accurate and true as of today, unless your lender gives you some other type of option. If you have a federal loan that's not owned by the Department of Ed, then the CARES Act would not apply to that loan either. Again, for students that are currently in this administrative forbearance, that's what this period of time is being called. It just means that if students were to make payments right now, they could essentially, if they don't have any outstanding interest on their loans, they could actually be making payments, and those payments would be applied to the principal, which can cut down on the total amount owed. So right now, anytime a student does make a payment, it's a good thing for the student. They're helping themselves by lowering their total loan balance. So what kind of loan could you possibly get to attend medical school? Well, as a graduate or professional student, you would be eligible for a direct unsubsidized loan. Again, you need to fill out the FAFSA form to be eligible for the loan. You will need to complete what's called a master promissory note, which you would have had to complete as an undergraduate student to get a direct subsidized or a direct unsubsidized loan as an undergraduate student as well. You can borrow up to that cost of attendance as set by the school. You do not have to pay on this loan while you're in school. However, because it's an unsubsidized loan, that means that the interest that is normally attached to this loan will continue to accrue on the loan. You're not required to make payments on it, but you can choose to if you would like to. For this academic year, the interest rate for a direct unsubsidized loan is actually set at 4.3%. That would be if the CARES Act wasn't in place. But because the CARES Act is in place, right now the interest rates are set at 0%. There is an origination fee to get this loan. So what that means is that if you apply for a loan, the 1.06% is going to be taken off of whatever you apply for before the money is dispersed to the school. The origination fee is simply a loan fee that is charged to borrow this money. You have a maximum of anywhere from 10 up to 30 years to pay off the loan, depending upon what kind of repayment plan you would choose to use when you do go into repayment. And so it's a very flexible program for students. You can actually even choose to postpone payment on this loan even while you're doing your residency program. So some residency programs are, 7 years in length. So some students may even choose to postpone paying for that full 7 years of their residency program, which is a possibility. If a student still needs more money above and beyond what the direct unsubsidized loan can provide, there's also what's called a direct plus loan. Now, this loan is a little bit different than the direct unsubsidized loan in the respect that with a plus loan, a credit check is done on the borrower of the loan. And you have to be, you don't have to have excellent credit. You just can't have any adverse credit. If you have adverse credit, you may not be approved for the loan. And what that means is you might need to have an endorser, or what most people are familiar with is called a co-signer. But if you know you have any kinds of credit issues right now, you can certainly work on improving your credit issues so that this would not be a hurdle to overcome when it comes time to apply for aid to go to medical school. Very similar to the direct unsubsidized loan, you have to fill out the FAFSA, you have to fill out the master promissory note, and just like the unsubsidized loan, you have to go through entrance counseling, which is a requirement, so that the federal government has documentation that you understand your rights and responsibility for borrowing federal loan monies. With a direct plus loan, you don't have to pay on the loan while you're in school, and you will have a 6-month period of time after you graduate before you'd go into repayment, just like with the unsubsidized loan. You can also postpone payment on this loan while you're in a residency program. The interest rate on a plus loan is generally 1% higher than what the unsubsidized rate is. But again, right now with CARES Act, interest rate is at a 0% right now. What the big difference is here, and you can see it right there, is the origination fee for a plus loan is 4.24%. So quadruple the amount of an unsubsidized loan. So this is going to be a more costly loan for you. And I always will tell students that it's really important to sit down, take a look at what the costs are at the school, what you really truly need to borrow for, and then make your plans accordingly. Many times students will receive an award notification from the school that says you're eligible to borrow X amount of money, but it doesn't mean you need to borrow X amount of money. You really need to take a look at what is necessary to cover all of my expenses. And in my opinion, only borrow what you need. If you find that you didn't borrow enough, you can generally go back to the school's financial aid office and say, hey, I was very conservative in what I borrowed, and I actually need to borrow a little bit more money. And they'll walk you through that process. The less you have to borrow as an undergraduate student and the less that you borrow as a medical student, it will be easier for you when it comes to repayment. So those are the two federal types of loan programs that you may use to cover your costs while in medical school. There are other types of loan programs, like I mentioned. There's institutional loans. These are not offered by every single school. It depends upon the school and the endowment that they have. So some schools have institutional loans to offer. If you are awarded an institutional loan, I would highly encourage you to check out the repayment terms and the interest rates, because in many cases, the interest rates or the repayment terms are very beneficial. They could actually sometimes be more beneficial even than the federal loan programs, because they could offer a lower interest rate, or maybe they are willing to subsidize some of the interest so that the borrower isn't responsible for it. Some schools will have an institutional loan which they say we are going to not require payment until the student's done with their residency program. And in my opinion, that's a very good benefit for the student to take out that institutional loan. You also want to find out, if you are awarded an institutional loan, is this something that's going to be for your first year, or is it for all 4 years of medical school? That's important to know, because that will have an impact on what you may need to borrow in another type of loan program. So just be aware of that. And then there are what's called private loans. Some people call them alternative loans, but a private or an alternative loan is a loan in which you go to maybe a financial institution, a credit union, or a bank to borrow money. Oftentimes, private loans are they look advantageous to borrowers because they might be offering a lower interest rate than what the federal programs do. But I caution students on borrowing private loans because of the fact that there may not be as many borrower benefits with private loans as there are with federal loans. For example, with your federal loan, with your direct unsubsidized and direct plus loans, I told you you can postpone payment on those loans while you're in a residency program. That's not generally the case with a private loan. And I say generally because there could be a program out there that is specifically allows that. But in most cases, private loans are not going to have as much flexibility as federal loans will. They will often entice students to borrow because they will say the interest rate's lower than what it is with a federal program. And that may be true. But for instance, like right now, the CARES Act is not having an effect on private loan rates. So whatever that interest rate is for a private loan, the borrower currently is still responsible for paying that interest on that loan. Whereas if you have federal loans right now, your interest rate is set at 0%. So understanding how a private loan would work before you borrow is very, very important. I would encourage you to take a look at this fact sheet that we have on the first website. It's called Federal versus Private Loans. It talks with you a little bit about what the differences are, what to be aware of, and possibly even questions to ask if you are considering a private loan. Most of the time, and like I said, I've been in financial aid for over 25 years, and my gut always tells people go to the federal programs before looking at any other type of program, except for possibly an institutional loan, because again, there are often benefits for students with those institutional loans. All right, so what do you need to know about these loans other than the facts that I just talked to you about? Well, this process called capitalization is really an important one. And I tell pre-med students about this now, and I harp on this because I can't tell you how many times I talk to M4 students who act like they have never heard of this process before. So I want you to be aware of this. I don't want this to scare you. I don't want this to overwhelm you, but you need to be aware of how interest works with your loans that you take out during medical school. So the money that you borrow every single year for medical school is the principal amount, okay? So let's say you borrow $50,000 each year. That means you borrow a total of $200,000 in principal. Now, and what I'm showing here is based upon a 2019 graduate. So I decided to show this example without any mention of the CARES Act being involved, because I think that gets a little confusing when I'm showing numbers. So this is for someone that was prior to COVID. So let's say you borrowed $200,000 in student loans. Each year's loans are set at a certain interest rate, and interest will start to accrue on the loan as soon as it is dispersed to the school. That money that's accruing in interest are my little jars at the bottom of the screen. Okay, that's all of the interest that's accruing every single year once the money is dispersed. If you were in school in or graduated in 2019 and you didn't pay on any of the interest that accrued while you were in school, about $25,000 of interest would have accrued during those 4 years of medical school. Then after you graduate, you have that 6-month grace period where you're not required to be making up any payments. During that period of time, interest is still accruing on the loan. So during that 6-month period of time, about another $6,000 of interest would have accrued on those loans that were dispersed for those 4 years. At the end of the grace period, at the end of that 6-month grace period, what's going to happen is this process called capitalization. This is where all of the outstanding interest is added to the principal. So it looks like this. Your $200,000 of principal now gets the interest from medical school and the interest from your grace period added to it. And this final capitalized amount after your 6-month grace period is over now results in you having a larger principal balance going forward. That principal balance would now be about $231,000. This is the new amount that will now accrue interest until your loan is paid in full. Capitalization is a fact of borrowing. It is a fact of what's going to happen with any of the interest that's accruing on any of your unsubsidized loans. I tell you this also to let you know that whenever you do borrow an unsubsidized loan, the servicer of your loan, that's basically who's managing your loan, is going to send you interest statements on a quarterly basis. They can be by mail or they can be by email, or you can even go on to your servicer's account and set up an account so that you can access your own loan information. And what you're going to see is the outstanding interest that's accruing on the loans. You can choose to make payments if you have the means to do so. If you don't, that's okay. That interest will stay separate until capitalization occurs. And again, it's just a fact of what happens with the loans and how interest works for student loans. So the bottom line is, if you have the means to do so, you could pay some of that interest that's accruing on your loans, whether it be quarterly or whether it be during your grace period. But if you can't, that's okay too. Again, you're going to have options for repayment, which will include paying any of this capitalized interest as well. The question I often get from pre-medical students is, how long is it going to take me to pay off all of these loans? And my answer is, it depends. It depends on a number of things. And one of the most important things it depends on is you. Is you and how you feel about loan debt, what your plans are for the future, meaning, are you looking at doing any programs that offer loan forgiveness? Are you thinking about working for the military, or are you thinking about doing research with the NIH, who might offer a loan repayment assistance program? Are you thinking about working in private versus public organizations after your residency is over? A lot of these things are going to be dependent upon those kinds of things and how you feel about your debt. Some students um, don't worry a ton about their loans because they say, you know, after residency, I'm going to be making more money. I'm going to be able to knock out these loans. Others hate the thought of having this debt hanging over their head. So they might attack their student loans in a totally different way. What you need to be aware of is that there is not a right or a wrong way in which to manage your loans. It's going to vary depending upon what your goals are and how you feel about your debt, and also based upon your debt level and your future financial plans and your future financial career goals. So I'm going to show you an example here, and this is not to overwhelm you. This is not to freak you out, but this is to give you an idea of what repayment could potentially look like. And I use that word very strongly, could, because of this. What I'm showing you right now is how things are currently as of today. I highly believe that within the next couple of years, there are going to be some changes to federal regulation and federal repayment plans. There's a lot of discussion going on, especially since we have a new administration and because nothing has changed within federal regulations for the last few years. And the Higher Education Authorization Act usually indicates that there are going to be changes to federal regulations. So take this with a grain of salt. Know that this is exactly how it is right now, but it's likely going to change. What will probably still stay the same is that you are going to have multiple options for managing your loan debt, and you are going to be able to repay this again, no matter how much you borrow. So I'm going to show you an example of borrowing $200,000, making $59,000 during residency, and having a post-residency salary of about $190,000. So what this looks like is, if you're a resident making $59,000 a year, that means you have about $3,400 a month to live off of. That's your net income. Post residency, when you're earning $190,000, you have just about $11,000 of net income to live off of. Okay. So what I wanted to show you is that you have the option of not paying while you're in residency program. That would be through a forbearance. So your payments would be zero during residency. Then you have the option of choosing which kind of repayment plan you want to use. Some will choose a standard repayment plan, which is basically a 10-year repayment term, which is considered a pretty aggressive repayment term. So in this case, that would be a total of 13 years because this is a 3-year residency that I'm showing you. This means that during residency, this particular borrower would not have any payment. After residency, to pay off the $200,000 that they borrowed, they would need to make a payment of $3,200 a month for 10 years, and they'd pay a total of $384,000. If the same borrower chose to do an income-driven repayment plan like the pay or repay option that are shown here, they'd have a payment of about $340 to $390 while they're in residency. The pay and repay plans offer a longer repayment term, 20 years for pay and 25 years for repay. The monthly payments after residency are again based on the borrower's income, not their debt. So the payments are going to range between $1,500 and $2,300. The total repayment amount you can see is a little bit different here. It's for repay, they actually pay more than what they would have if they did the aggressive payment with standard. You can see with pay, that last column shows forgiven, and that's because the income-driven repayment plans actually offer loan forgiveness, but it's a taxable forgiveness. That just means that you're going to have to pay tax on the amount that's forgiven in the year in which it's forgiven. So what I wanted to show you and what I hope you see here is that no matter how much you borrow, you can choose to make a payment or not make a payment during residency. If you choose to make a payment during residency, it's likely going to be affordable if you choose an income-driven repayment plan. You have the ability to choose how long it takes you to pay off the plan, depending upon which plan you choose, standard, income-driven. So in examples here, if you wanted to pay the loan off in the fastest way possible, well, then forbearance and choosing standard might be your best option. If you're concerned about payments after residency, again, you can choose an income-driven repayment plan so that your income starts out lower. But if you want to make larger payments, you can do that at any time that you have the means to do so. Some people are driven by the income forgiveness that might be available with some of the income-driven repayment plans, or possibly with some of the loan forgiveness options that are available through different federal or state programs as well. So just know that those are options that could possibly be available too. Now, are there any programs other than the income-driven repayment plans that offer loan forgiveness that could help you? And yeah, there are. Like I mentioned, you might do research through the National Institutes of Health. They have a loan repayment program. Maybe you're interested in providing a service to an underrepresented community, and in response for your service, they will provide you with loan repayment assistance. Maybe you're interested in working for a nonprofit. Through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, you can actually make payments for 10 years. And if you still have a balance remaining after 10 years, your balance on your federal loans can be forgiven through the PSLF program. And as I mentioned before, maybe military services of interest to you. They actually offer loan repayment assistance. They provide you a stipend in addition to the stipend or the salary that you're receiving from your residency or post-residency salary as well. So there are other options for loan forgiveness as well, or repayment assistance. And we actually have a database out on the FIRST website. If you go to aamc.org/stloan, you'll see this database that actually has over 79 programs broken down by state or federal designation, and also includes information such as scholarships, loan repayment assistance, or loan forgiveness programs as well. So there are a number of options to investigate. Now, I know that was a ton of information. We are right at 7 o'clock. I know some of you probably don't want to hang on anymore, but I know some of you asked some questions. So I'm going to turn it back over to Tony to let me know what questions came in. And before we go to do that, I just want to, again, thank you for joining me. And I want you to know that if you do have any questions that might not be answered through this Q&A, you are welcome to email me at first@aamc.org, and I'd be happy to respond to you there as well. So thank you for your time. And Tony, I'll let you go ahead.
Thank you, Julie. And you gave us so much information. I feel like I learned so much, so thank you for hosting this presentation for us. Now, I know we had a couple questions as far as when to necessarily complete FAFSA, as far as students that may be applying for this upcoming cycle, for an example, when should they be looking to complete FAFSA and actually go through the process of contacting their financial aid office?
First of all, before I answer that question, I would say you want to go out to all of the schools' websites that you're considering, because they are going to have their own timeline. So if you're thinking about, let's say you're going to start school here in September, well, now is the time that you could fill out your FAFSA form, okay? But keep in mind that the school may have their own requirements, and they may have their own financial aid application, which might have a different type of deadline process. So be aware of that. And that's why I say check with the websites first before filling out your applications. But technically, you can actually fill out a FAFSA you use what's called prior year tax information now. So it's from 2 years ago. So there's really not a delay like there used to be in the olden days. So you won't have a problem as far as obtaining the information that's needed to fill out the FAFSA anyways.
Thank you, Julie. Another question that popped up is, how do schools determine if you come from an economically disadvantaged background and that you're eligible for a needs-based scholarship?
Right. Well, a lot of them will use the financial information from the FAFSA form. Some are going to use their own financial aid application to obtain that kind of information. Some will look and see what kind of aid you qualified for as an undergraduate student, because many times that information is available to the financial aid staff, so they can determine that by looking at what kind of awards you've already received as a borrower. So that's how that information is normally obtained. Sometimes even on the admissions applications, that information is even asked of applicants, and that can sometimes be shared with the financial aid staff as well.
Perfect. Another question that came up was, when should somebody apply for the fee assistance program?
You want to apply before you need any of the benefits that are covered, such as the medical school admissions requirements, before you want access to that database, before you register to take the Mcat exam. I would say make sure that you at least give it, since it can take at 10 business days, I would say plan backwards from that. So if you know that you want to purchase MSAR in March, well, then you want to apply for the fee assistance program here in February.
Thank you. As a DACA recipient, are we expected to apply for FAFSA for medical school?
That is a very good question. And I would say that's going to be dependent upon the school's requirements, because as you're probably aware, DACA students are not eligible for federal aid. However, some schools might have institutional funds that they can provide to DACA students. Some schools are able to offer tuition discounts for students that are DACA students. So it's going to be dependent upon the school. There are some schools that also work with DACA students and different organizations within the community that offer specific funding for DACA students, not federal funding, but other types of funding programs. So I would highly recommend, if you're interested in obtaining more information about funding that might be available for DACA students, that actually is in the medical school admissions requirements, or MSAR. Many schools provide that information in there. There is also a lot of information out there from the Dreamers organization that works with DACA students in providing resources. There are a number of schools that have a large larger DACA population, so they would be good resources to go to. And if you're specifically looking for information about DACA, I can certainly send you some resources. So I would encourage you to email me at thatfirst@aamc.org, and I'd be happy to send out some resources.
Thank you. Could you speak a little bit more about the interest rate on loans and what that means? This was more of like just generally broad speaking.
Sure. Any type of a consumer loan that you take out is generally going to be charging you interest, just like a credit card. There's interest on any balance that you take out. If you don't pay for a credit card, if you don't pay that balance off every month, that interest is going to accrue. It's very similar with student loans, except student loans are accruing interest on a daily basis. So what's different with student loans federal student loans is that interest is accruing for medical students because they're unsubsidized loans. So the student borrower is responsible for that interest. It doesn't mean you have to pay that interest while you're in school, but ultimately you're going to be responsible for the interest that accrues on the loan, and you're going to pay it back. So it's basically a fee for borrowing money. So there's the origination fee, which is a loan fee charged to the borrower as well, but there's also the interest that accrues that is also an expense for borrowing money. And of course, the lower the interest rate, the better. So that's why I kept saying with the CARES Act being set at 0%, that's a great thing for borrowers right now. That's a positive benefit for borrowers.
So that kind of leads us to our next question here. Do you need to have a good credit score in order to apply to medical school?
That's an excellent question. You do not have good credit to qualify for a direct unsubsidized loan. There is actually no credit check for a direct unsubsidized loan. However, if you need more money than what you can borrow under the direct unsubsidized loan and you turn to that direct plus loan, then you have to have not necessarily excellent credit, but you can't have adverse or negative credit. Otherwise, you may need a cosigner. When it comes to private loans, many times you are going to need really good credit to qualify for the loan on your own. And in all actuality, most private or alternative loans are going to require a cosigner in order for the borrower to be approved for the loan. That's just generally how those private loans work. As far as institutional loans, to my knowledge, I don't know of a school that will run a credit check to provide you an institutional loan. I have never heard of that. I can't say that it doesn't exist, but I am not aware of that. But what you do need to be aware of is that sometimes schools will take a look at a borrower's credit worthiness because they want to make sure that the student is being a good consumer so that they will understand about repaying student loans. Not to say that it's going to stop them from being accepted to medical school, but it could be important for a school, especially maybe a school in which they're taking in an international student who's not eligible for federal aid. And so that student's going to be required to pay out of pocket. They might be looking more at that student's credit worthiness.
And I heard you mention the term adverse credit. Could you speak to that a little bit? I think some of the members in our audience could use some further clarity on that.
Sure. It's basically when a credit check is run, if there's any type of negatives, maybe you didn't pay your bills on time. Maybe you have an outstanding medical bill. Maybe you have a judgment against you for some reason. Those are all kinds of things that are considered adverse or negative credit types of issues. So those are things that you can work on improving now. One of the best ways to improve your credit is to pay your bills on time, every time, all the time. And in all actuality, if you're sitting here saying, well, I think I do need to improve my credit, I would encourage you to go out to the First website. We have videos about how to improve your credit. We have fact sheets about how to improve your credit, what goes into a credit score, all of those things. And annualcreditreport.com is where you can go to get your free credit report from each of the credit bureaus. Normally it's one time per year, but right now, because of COVID and because of how there are so many scams out there, all the credit bureaus are actually offering consumers the ability to download their credit report weekly until April of 2021. So I'd encourage you to check that out, be aware of your credit.
Thank you, Julie. And you know what? I want to end with this. Do you have any advice that you would give to, an aspiring medical student, someone who doesn't know or is just new to this process? What words would you give them?
I would say start planning, start preparing, and start educating yourself, because most of the times financial aid is just a matter of understanding the process. And a lot of times, which I totally get, students are so excited and so concerned about getting into medical school that they don't think about the finances until after the fact. But in my opinion, if you can take the bull by the horns and start thinking about this information early on, it's going to make your life easier, because that could potentially cut down on you over borrowing, and just being a good money manager can certainly help as you prepare to go to medical school. But the bottom line here is, no matter how much you borrow, whether it's $50,000 or $500,000, you are going to be able to afford this We want you to follow your dreams. Don't let the finances stop you, because this is going to be something that you can do.
Thank you so much. And I think that will conclude our evening. Julie, as Julie mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, look at the email on the screen. Please be sure to contact it first at aamc.org. If you haven't screenshotted that, please screenshot that and share it with your friends, because we want to make sure that we answer anyone and everyone's questions that is interested in going to medical school. Again, Julie, thank you for such a great presentation. I feel like we all learned a lot, and have a great evening, everyone.
My pleasure. Good night, everybody.